In the last couple of weeks, there were quite a handful of very important events that managed to drastically shake the course of the Pacific War, including the fall of the Philippines and the Battle of the Coral Sea. Today we're going to see the direct aftermath to these events as the Japanese recover from their losses in the New Guinea region and the Americans prepare to avenge their Filipino compatriots. And primarily, we're also going to cover the final retreat of the British and Chinese forces in an effort to safely get out of Burma. Join us as we plunge into a new episode of the Pacific War. Shout out to the Polish Institute of National Remembrance who paid for this video. Their game, called Cypher's Game, is a free first-person puzzler set in a detailed and realistic rendition of a rarely talked about war, the Polish Bolshevik War of 1920. You carry out the real mission of Polish soldiers to sabotage a Soviet armoured train, all using the genuine machines of the era. You'll get to know what the tech and especially the train looks like up close and how it all worked. Enjoy a rare look at this history-altering conflict through the eyes of the soldiers carrying out these deadly missions, in a game designed to educate and entertain. As mentioned, it's free, so well worth a look for the historical experience alone. Check it out on Steam. We'll have the link in the description. May 8th had seen the epic conclusion of the Battle of the Coral Sea as Admiral Fletcher's task force retreated back to Tongatabu and Admiral Inoue decided to postpone the execution of Operation MO. While the Americans had suffered a key loss with the destruction of the carrier Lexington, the Japanese air and naval forces had also been badly mauled in the New Guinea region. The light aircraft carrier Shoho had been sunk, the carrier Shokaku had been damaged so badly that she had to head back to Truk for repairs, and the carrier Zuikaku had been crippled by its heavy amount of aircraft losses. For the Japanese, the postponement of the invasion of Port Moresby was annoying. But knowing that the Shokaku and Zuikaku would be unavailable for Operation MI was far more significant. They believed that they had at least sunk both American carriers on the Coral Sea, so the 4 Japanese carriers assigned for the operation had to be more than enough. Admiral Yamamoto was still rehearsing his desired invasion of Midway, and he was also planning to support it with a surprise attack against the Aleutians, aiming to divert the attention of the defenders and to neutralize the American air power in Alaska. As for the Allies, their codebreakers and cryptanalysts were hard at work, and by the end of May, they knew the date, place and time of Operation MI, as well as the Japanese forces that were going to be involved. Admirals Nimitz and King immediately started to rush reinforcements to Midway, while also starting to draw plans for a trap that had the potential to deal a crushing blow to the IJN. Thus, a truly decisive engagement was brewing in the Pacific. Meanwhile, although the invasion of Port Moresby had been unsuccessful, Admiral Inoue approved the continuation of Operation RY, the planned invasion of Nauru and Ocean Islands. These 2 islands were very important for the Japanese due to their richness in phosphate, a resource mined for making fertilizers, ammunition, and explosives. A small invasion fleet under Admiral Shima, mainly built around the mine layer, Akinoshima, which had been assembled to invade Tulagi, departed Rabaul for a second time on May 11th to escort a small navy detachment of around 400 men towards Nauru. The operation was off to a bad start as the Okinoshima was outright torpedoed by the American submarine S-42 while steaming off New Ireland. The mine layer suffered enormous damage from the attack and eventually capsized in St. George's Channel. Shima then moved his flag to the destroyer Yosuki, and after depth charging the enemy submarine, he continued onwards towards his objective. But as we will recall from the Battle of the Coral Sea, Admiral Nimitz had sent all of their aircraft carriers to disrupt Operation MO, whereas Admiral Fletcher's carriers had quickly arrived and engaged the Japanese invasion fleet. The 2 carriers under Admiral Halsey that had taken part in the Doolittle raid were now arriving in the area. Acting on the obtained intelligence about the planned Japanese invasion of Nauru, Nimitz directed Halsey to head towards Nauru as a feint to stop the Japanese operation. On May 15th, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft from Tulagi sighted the American force, and Nimitz's gamble proved to pay off. as Admiral Inoue had no other choice but to call back Shima's fleet, which lacked the air cover to safely conduct the operation. For a second time, Inoue's plans had been disrupted by the appearance of enemy carriers, and Operation RY would be postponed, just like the invasion of Port Moresby was. In the meantime, we'll move to Burma, where the plans for the evacuation of the British and Chinese forces were being drawn up. As we've last seen, General Ida had started in late March a three-pronged offensive against central Burma, employing 4 battle-hardened and fully equipped divisions against the Allied defenders. During this campaign, the most important breakthrough was achieved by the 56th Division, which had rapidly pierced the Shan states and had now gotten to the town of Lashio, the starting terminal of the Burma Road, by April 29th. This essentially forced the Chinese Expeditionary Forces under General Stilwell to retreat back to China or to India, with the 6th Army already retreating beyond Kentung, the 66th Army withdrawing through the Burma Road towards the Salween River, and the 5th Army holding with the British defenders at Meiktila. The Burma Corps under General Slim had also been badly beaten by the 33rd Division of General Sakurai, their soldiers facing near exhaustion and collapse after the long period of consecutive withdrawals since Mul Mine. As such, General Alexander saw no point in continuing to hold northern Burma with his weakened force, and with the deadly monsoon season approaching, he had decided to retreat back to India to preserve the remainder of his army. On April 25th, the British withdrawal towards the north bank of the Irrawaddy began, leaving only the 63rd Indian Brigade to hold Meiktila. 1 day later, the Indians would successfully repel an attack by the 55th Division, giving ample time for the British and Chinese forces to withdraw towards the Ava Bridge. Stilwell, however, was adamant to make a last stand in North Burma, with the 22nd and 38th Divisions sent to delay the Japanese advance along the Mandalay-Myitkyina Railway, while the 96th Division directly stood in defense of Myitkyina. But his intentions to defend Myitkyina were doomed from the start, as the 56th Division rapidly seized the town of Namkan and its key bridge over the Shweli River. From there, the invaders would capture the town of Bamo and would finally get to occupy Myitkyina on May 8th, definitely leaving Stilwell no other choice but to retreat out of Burma. On April 27th, Stilwell had also presented to Chiang Kai-shek a proposal to organize and train a Chinese force in India, hoping to create an army of 100,000 soldiers, equipped with Allied Lend-Lease and trained as elite troops, which would carry out the reconquest of Burma from British-controlled India. The approval of the Generalissimo, given by May 3rd, gave Stilwell the chance to retreat with some of his forces towards India, although his control of the 5th Army would prove to be tenuous during the Chinese withdrawal. As the British and Chinese forces crossed the Ava Bridge in an action reminiscent of the Sitang Bridge disaster, the 48th Indian Brigade was placed at Chaotsé to delay the Japanese advance. On April 28th, the Indian defenders were attacked head-on by the fresh 18th Division, yet their skillful use of artillery and armour managed to hold off the invaders below the Midnir River. By April 30th, all Allied troops had crossed to the north, and the Ava Bridge had been blown thanks to the well-fought actions of the 48th. But on that same day, Sakurai had rushed his forces from Yanonyang and had reached Monua before the 1st Burma Division, forcing the defenders to retreat in confusion. The following day, Slim sent the 13th and 63rd Indian Brigades to counterattack and relieved the trapped 1st Burma. The attack on the evening of May 1st initially went really well, but allegedly, the Indians were ordered to withdraw to the north on May 2nd. It is believed that the Japanese used captured tanks from the 7th Armoured Brigade to deliver this false message in a ruse that was very successful. Nonetheless, the 1st Burma had gotten to break free, and the 33rd Division was truly exhausted after its many forced marches, so Sakurai's men would fail to hotly pursue the fleeing defenders. By May 4th, the majority of the Burma Corps would reach Yau, leaving the 2nd Burma Brigade to hold the town, while the rest of the British forces continued on towards the Chindwin River. Meanwhile, the Chinese divisions had reached the Indore-Katha area, where they received orders from the Generalissimo himself to continue north towards Myitkyina and then retreat safely to China. At this point, Stilwell had decided that the supply situation in North Burma and the Japanese presence there were too dangerous for his forces, so the Fifth Army needed to escape to West India. He set himself out from Katha with a party of 114 people, reaching Imphal on May 20th after a long trek under the blazing sun and reaffirming the nickname Vinegar Joe due to his indomitable spirit that could traverse any jungle. Stilwell expected the Fifth Army to follow behind him, yet didn't know that he needed Chiang's permission for it, something that left the Generalissimo feeling like the American general had deserted his own men, and was specifically incensed about losing the 200th Division, which was the first mechanized division of the NRA. The aforementioned conflict in orders, however, saw only the 38th Division of General Sun decide to retreat west towards the Chindwin. The 38th would have the 55th Division hot on their heels, but the valiant rearguard efforts of the 113th Regiment allowed Sun's men to get west of the Chindwin by May 30th. The Chinese general would then bring his division intact through the Chin Hills and would safely arrive in Assam by early June. There, despite their heroic efforts to save the British at Yanonyang, the 38th were met with racism by the Assam governor, who wanted to disarm and confine the Chinese soldiers, but was stopped by General Wavell. In the meantime, the 22nd and 96th Divisions took diverging routes northwards that saw them get caught by the deadly monsoons in the jungles of northwestern Burma. The Chinese soldiers were only kept alive by the valiant airdrops carried out by Chennault and his Flying Tigers, which allowed the 22nd Division to eventually reach Ledo in July, while the 96th Division got to Fort Hertz, from where it would eventually escape towards Yunnan through the eastern end of the Himalayas. This desolate and inhospitable area would then become part of the Hump, an airlift route to China that was to be the only way to transport equipment there after the fall of the Burma Road. Looking to the east, the 200th Division departed Tongyi on May 6th, heading towards Myitkyina as per Chiang's orders. But their advance was quickly stopped by the Japanese, who decisively defeated them in battle and killed General Dai in the process. Leaderless, the remainder of the division turned back and moved on Bamo and through the Japanese lines, miraculously getting to the Yunnan border by early June. And on the Burma Road, the 66th Army continued to retreat as elements of the 56th Division pursued them. On May 4th, the 29th Division was decisively defeated at Wanding on the border with Yunnan, suffering heavy casualties but at least managing to escape. The 28th Division would suffer many incursions as well, but it would get east of the Salween by May 15th, joining the 29th Division and the 71st Army in defense of Yunnan. On May 9th, however, the 71st Army had launched a counterattack to prevent the Japanese from advancing into China. This assault completely backfired and saw the Japanese get to Honghe and Tengchong, yet the Chinese soldiers continued to fight with the air support of the Flying Tigers until May 23rd, when they finally repelled the invaders back to Longling, from where the Japanese would be prevented from making further breakthroughs into Yunnan. Looking further south, it was Thailand's turn to start its offensive. As we'll recall, in December of 1941, the Thais had allowed the Japanese full access through their country to attack Malaya and Burma in return for the lost territory that they had conceded to the British Empire. Yet they didn't join the war until January 25th, when Phibun declared war on the Allies. Now their first offensive began, as the Phayap Army of Lieutenant General Charun Seriaingrit invaded the southern Shan states on May 10th in coordination with the 56th Regiment of the 18th Division. Fighting quickly erupted with the 49th Division at Kengtung, yet the Chinese valiantly managed to hold their ground against overwhelming forces. Eventually, Chiang ordered them to retreat to Yunnan, so the combined Japanese-Thai forces could occupy Kengtung on May 28th, then advancing on Mongyong 2 days later and finally securing the Salween Valley by the end of the month. And getting back to the British defenders, most of the Burma Corps had crossed onto the western bank of the Chindwin River by May 9th, leaving only the 2nd Burma Brigade and the 48th Indian Brigade to hold the Shuigwin Basin, through which the defenders were retreating towards Kolewa. At dawn on May 10th, Sakurai's men caught up with them and launched a devastating assault against the southern lip of the basin. The British soldiers fiercely resisted while the last units crossed the river, and by May 12th, the 2 remaining battalions had successfully disengaged from the enemy, joining the rest of Slim's forces as they traversed the Kabul Valley towards the border town of Tamu. It took them 7 days to reach their destination through unforgiving jungle terrain infested with malaria, and by May 28th, most of the Burma Corps had crossed the border into India, then continuing towards the town of Imphal. The 12,000 exhausted and malarious survivors of the Burma Army joined the 23rd Indian Division as the only line of defense for the province of Assam, yet they were not in any shape to stand against a renewed Japanese offensive. Luckily for them, General Ida had no plans to overextend his forces with an invasion of India, especially with the deadly monsoons assaulting the region, so the British would be allowed to regroup, rest, and prepare their defences for another day. It's worth mentioning at this point that since the evacuation of Mulmine and Rangoon, thousands upon thousands of Indian and Burmese inhabitants also began to move west to escape the Japanese terror. This set off an exodus of more than 500,000 refugees into the provinces of Bengal and Assam, something that would have dire consequences in the future. The region of Arakan was also evacuated on May 4th after destroying the airport of Akyab, and the region would see Japanese forces entering to occupy it. This effectively concluded the invasion of Burma, and it was another amazing victory for the Japanese Empire, which had once again managed to prove its military superiority over the British forces. Next week, we're going to depart the Pacific Theatre to take a look at some events happening in mainland China, where Chiang Kai-shek and his forces faced the disastrous consequences of the Doolittle Raid. If you don't want to miss that episode, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.